My name is Caroline Merritt. I'm 34 years old. And the day my brother walked into my office, he had no idea that the company he was standing in, the receptionist who greeted him, the logo on the wall, the name on the lease, all of it belonged to me. He found out when I walked through the door. I watched his face do something I had waited 10 years to see. Not with satisfaction. Not with anger. Just with the quiet, settled feeling of a woman who had built every single thing in that room from nothing, after he made sure she had nothing to build from. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to a lawyer's office in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm 24 years old. I'm wearing the only black dress I own. It still smells like funeral flowers. And a man in a gray suit is reading words out loud that are about to take everything my father ever promised me and hand it to the brother sitting 3 feet to my left, who is staring at the table and working very hard not to smile. That's where this story starts. That moment is why everything that came after happened. And trust me, what came after is the part worth hearing. But before we go any further, if you're already feeling this, take a second to like and subscribe. And drop your city and local time in the comments. I want to know exactly where in the world you're listening to this right now. Okay, let's go all the way back. My father, Robert Merritt, was the kind of man who fixed things. Not just objects, though he could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded and retile a bathroom in a weekend. He fixed situations, problems, people. If something was broken, Dad believed it could be made right. That was his entire philosophy, compressed into the calluses on his hands and the way he never once raised his voice in 30 years of marriage. He grew up in rural Mississippi, the son of a sharecropper, and he clawed his way into the middle class the slow, honest way: community college, a business degree taken at night while working days, a small HVAC company he started with 1 truck, 1 phone number, and a handshake reputation. By the time I was 10 years old, Merritt Climate Solutions had 43 employees and a waiting list that stretched 3 weeks out. Dad was not a wealthy man by the standards of people who've never had nothing. But by the standards of where he came from, he had built something real. Something that meant his children would never have to start from zero the way he did. That was the dream. I know it was because he told me. He told me specifically. Not my brother. Me. There were 2 children in the Merritt house. Me, Caroline, the older one by 4 years. And my brother Derek, the younger one, the one my mother called her heart walking outside her body. I know she said that because I heard it through a kitchen doorway when I was 12, and I stood in that hallway for a long time afterward waiting to hear my name attached to something equally warm. I'm still waiting. My mother Patricia loved Derek the way some people love a religion, completely, without question, and with a quiet suspicion toward anything that might compete with that devotion. I was not hated. I want to be precise about that. I was simply beside the point. The child she'd had first, before Derek arrived and rearranged her entire emotional universe. Derek understood this from the time he was old enough to use it. By 14, he had mastered the art of the setup. Something would go wrong. A broken window, money missing from Mom's purse, a scratch on the car. And by the time the story reached our mother's ears, it had curved somehow back to me. Not because he was obvious about it. Because he was very, very good. I stopped defending myself at 15. Not because I gave up. Because I understood that in our house, truth was not a currency that bought anything. Dad saw it. I know he did. Because sometimes, quietly, he would appear in the doorway of wherever I'd retreated. My room, the garage, the backyard. And he'd sit down without saying anything, and after a while he'd say, "You know I see you, Caro." Not an apology. Not a promise to fix it. Just a witness. Just proof that I wasn't invisible to everyone. Those moments were the thing that kept me sane. I left for Tulane at 18 on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. I studied business, not because it thrilled me, but because I had grown up watching my father run a company and I understood in my bones that financial independence was the only kind of freedom that was actually real. I graduated in 4 years, moved to New Orleans, took a job at a logistics firm, and spent every year after that learning how businesses work from the inside out. I came home for holidays. I kept my visits short and my expectations lower. Then, the spring I turned 24, my father called me on a Tuesday evening. He never called on Tuesdays. He was a Sunday morning person, coffee, the newspaper, unhurried. So when I saw his name on my screen on a Tuesday at 7 p.m., I sat down before I even answered. "Caro," he said, "I need you to come home this weekend. I need to talk to you about some things. The business. The house. What happens after?" I drove home that Friday. We sat on the back porch until midnight, the two of us with sweet tea and the sound of the neighbor's wind chimes, and my father told me what he decided. "The company goes to you," he said. "You understand it. You've always understood it. Derek loves the idea of things more than the work of them. That's not a cruelty. It's just the truth. He gets the house. A cash sum. He'll be taken care of. But the business needs someone who will actually run it." He looked at me. "And that's you." I remember the exact weight of the air that night. Warm and thick, the way Louisiana nights get in April. I didn't say much. I reached over and put my hand on his, the way he used to do for me in doorways, and we sat there while the wind chimes moved. 8 months later, my father had a heart attack in a Home Depot parking lot on a Saturday afternoon. He was 58 years old. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. I want you to picture that lawyer's office again. Gerald Foss, 15-year family attorney, gray suit, manila folder. Me on one side of the table, Derek and my mother on the other. 11 days after my father's funeral, and the flowers I'd worn on my dress had finally stopped being something I could smell. Gerald Foss opened the folder. He read a will dated 14 months prior, 4 months before my father and I sat on that back porch, that left the business, the house, all liquid assets, and an investment portfolio entirely to Derek Merritt, with one cash disbursement to me. $25,000. Described in the document word for word as, and I memorized this, I will never forget this, in recognition of her independence and self-sufficiency. Like a severance package. Like a door closing politely in my face. I looked at Gerald Foss. "This is not the will my father described to me." He looked at his folder. "This is the most recent document on file, Ms. Merritt." I looked at my brother. Derek was looking at the conference table with the specific stillness of a person who is working very hard at appearing to feel something they do not feel. I looked at my mother. She was already reaching for a tissue. "Mom." "Nothing." "Mom, look at me." She looked at the window. I turned back to Gerald Foss and asked for a copy of the document, the filing date, and the names of the witnesses. Then I stood up, picked up my purse and walked out of that office. I drove 3 hours north with the windows down and the radio off. And I made a decision that I have not regretted for a single day in the 10 years since. I was not going to fight them. I was not going to spend the next 5 years in courtrooms, bleeding money and energy into a battle built on a midnight conversation and a back porch no one else had been sitting on. I was going to take the $25,000. I was going to leave Louisiana. And I was going to build something so undeniable, so visible, so completely and provably mine, that the day they needed something from me, and I already knew with the certainty of someone who had watched these people her entire life, that day was coming, they would have to walk through a door with my name on it to get it. I cashed the check. I drove north. I did not say goodbye. Nashville doesn't care who you were before you got there. That's not a complaint. That's the reason I chose it. Nobody in Nashville knew that I was the girl whose brother had just stolen her inheritance. Nobody knew about the back porch or the wind chimes or the $25,000 check that was supposed to represent the sum total of my value to my own family. Nobody knew any of it, and that anonymity was the first real gift I'd been given in years. I landed on Priya's couch, Priya Anand, my college roommate for one semester at Tulane before she transferred, the kind of friend who doesn't need history to show up for you, just character. She had a 2-bedroom apartment in East Nashville, and a pull-out sofa she offered without conditions or a timeline. "Stay as long as you need," she said the night I arrived, setting a cup of tea on the coffee table in front of me. 6 weeks, I told her. "I'll be out in 6 weeks. She didn't argue. She knew me well enough to know I wasn't being modest. I was being precise. I was out in 5. The room I rented after Priya's couch was in a shared house in Germantown. $800 a month, 3 other tenants, a kitchen we divided by shelf. I took the smallest room because it was $40 cheaper and $40 was $40. I had a budget written out in a notebook by the end of my first week. Not a loose one. A surgical one. Every dollar had a job. Housing, transportation, food, professional development. Nothing else. Not for the first year. I wasn't punishing myself, I was protecting the runway. $25,000 sounds like a cushion until you do the math on how fast it disappears when it's all you have. I took the logistics job that my former colleague had mentioned. A mid-size freight brokerage called Cumberland Transport, moving goods between regional distributors and carriers across the Mid-South. It was not glamorous work. It was spreadsheets and phone calls and learning, as fast as I possibly could, Everything I didn't already know about an industry I'd only ever seen from the outside. I was good at it immediately. Not because I was exceptional, because I was hungry in a way that most people in that office simply were not. When you have lost everything that was supposed to be given to you, you develop a very specific relationship with what you build yourself. You treat it differently. You protect it differently. You understand at a cellular level that it can be taken, so you make it too big to take. I stayed at Cumberland for 14 months. Long enough to learn everything they could teach me. Long enough to understand exactly where the inefficiencies were, where the money was being left on the table, where a smarter operation could do more with less and charge accordingly. Then I left. Professionally, graciously, 2 weeks' notice and a handshake. I left because what I'd gone there to learn, I'd learned. Merit Logistics Solutions. I filed the paperwork on a Tuesday morning in a government office on Charlotte Avenue. The woman behind the counter handed me back my copies without looking up. I walked outside into the October sunlight and stood on the sidewalk holding a folder that contained, legally, the beginning of everything. I thought about my father. I thought about the name on the folder, Merit, and the fact that it was also the name on his trucks, on his invoices, on the sign above the shop in Baton Rouge that was now, according to the will that was not the will he'd written, my brother's. I kept the name deliberately. Not out of sentiment. Out of record. Someday I decided the name Merit on a business would mean something that Derek had not built and could not claim. Someday there would be a Merit company that was entirely, irrevocably, documentably mine. I went back inside and got started. The first contract was small. A regional food distributor called Hartwell Brothers who needed someone to manage their third-party carrier relationships, scheduling, rate negotiation, claims handling, all the administrative weight that was pulling their operations team underwater. They'd been burned twice by larger brokerages who'd overpromised and underdelivered, and they were suspicious of anyone new. I spent 3 weeks earning that contract before I asked for it. I showed up at their warehouse, introduced myself to the operations manager, a tired, precise man named Gary who had been doing this job for 19 years, and asked if I could shadow their process for a day free of charge, just to understand their actual needs before I proposed anything. Gary looked at me for a long moment. You want to work for free for a day so you can pitch me later? I want to understand your operation before I tell you how I can help it. If I can't help it, I'll tell you that too. He let me in. I found 4 things they were overpaying for, and 1 carrier relationship that was quietly costing them more in delays than the contract savings justified. I wrote it up in a clean 2-page document and left it on Gary's desk at the end of the day with my business card. He called me the following Monday. How much? He said. I gave him a number 15% below what he'd been paying the previous broker. How do I know you can actually do this? You don't, I said. Give me 90 days. If I haven't earned your confidence by then, you walk away and you owe me nothing. 90 days later, Gary renewed. He also called his counterpart at a produced distributor 2 counties over and told him to talk to me. That's how it starts. Not with grand gestures. With 90 days and a kept promise. I hired Deb Kowalski 22 months in. She showed up to the interview in a blazer that was slightly too large for her, and handed me a resume that was, objectively, better than anything I had any right to expect at the salary I'd posted. I asked her why she was applying. I got laid off when my company was acquired, she said. The new owners brought their own people. 18 years of carrier relationships, and they handed me a box. I understood that feeling in a way I didn't explain to her then. What do you want from this job? I asked. She looked at me directly. I want to work somewhere that doesn't treat people like line items. And I want to build something again. I hired her that afternoon. Deb knew things about freight carrier negotiations that I had spent 2 years trying to learn from books and experience. She knew people. She knew which carriers were reliable and which ones looked good on paper. She knew how to read a contract for the clause that would kill you 6 months later. She was simply extraordinary. And she had been thrown away by people who couldn't see it. We understood each other without having to explain ourselves. Within a year, the 2 of us had grown the client list to 11 accounts. Within 2 years we needed more people. I hired carefully. Always carefully. Every person I brought into that company, I thought about the same way my father had talked about his business. You are only as good as the team around you, and a team is built on trust, not just talent. I paid fairly from the start, not because I was flush with money, because I understood that people who feel valued don't leave, and turnover is the most expensive thing a small business can do to itself. By the time I was 29, we had offices. Actual offices, not a corner of my apartment. A suite on the fourth floor of a building on Commerce Street, with a glass door and a receptionist named Marcus who had the best phone voice I have ever heard in my life, and a talent for making difficult clients feel heard before I even picked up the line. By the time I was 31, we had clients in 7 states, 41 employees, and a revenue number that I will not say out loud here because this is not a brag. What I will say is that my father's company, at its absolute peak, had never seen a number like it. I thought about him every single day. Now I need to tell you about the phone call. Year 3 in Nashville. Late October, a Wednesday, 7:15 in the evening. Office mostly empty. Me at my desk going through a carrier contract. My cell phone rings. Louisiana area code, number I don't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. Is this Caroline Merritt? The voice was older. Measured. Like someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say many times. Who's calling? I said. My name is Elaine Foss. Gerald Foss was my husband. I set down the contract. Gerald Foss. The gray suit. The manila folder. The will that was not the will. Was, I said. He passed in October. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast. A breath. He asked me to call you. Not right away, he was specific about that. He said to wait. He said if I called too soon it wouldn't matter yet. He said wait until she's had time to build something. Then she'll know what to do with it. I didn't speak. Ms. Merritt, my husband carried something for a long time. About your father's estate. Tell me, I said. There was a second will. Your father did come to Gerald in the spring the way you said. There was a document that contained exactly what you told people it contained, the business to you, the house, and a cash sum to your brother. Gerald filed it properly. It was in the system. The office was very quiet. Your brother came to see Gerald approximately 2 weeks before your father's heart attack. I don't know the full details of what was said in that meeting, Gerald would never tell me. But I know that after that visit, the second document was no longer in the file. And when the time came, Gerald filed the original. The old one. I pressed my hand flat against the surface of my desk. Gerald was not a good man in that moment, Elaine Foss said. He knew it every day afterward. He tried to find a way to undo it, but by the time he was sick enough to stop being afraid of the consequences, too many years had passed. He wanted you to know the truth. He said you deserve to hear it said plainly, even if it changes nothing practical. It changes something, I said. I hoped it might. I thanked her. I told her I was sorry for her loss and I meant it. Not for Gerald, for her, for the weight of being the person who carries a secret like that on behalf of someone else. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time. Then I opened a new document and typed 5 words. He stole it. It's confirmed. I saved the file. I named it Record. I put it in a folder I would not open again for 4 years. I went back to the carrier contract on my desk. There was nothing to do with that information yet. But knowing is different from suspecting. Suspecting lives in your chest and costs you energy. Knowing lives on a hard drive and waits patiently. I had learned to be patient. I should tell you what was happening in Baton Rouge while I was building in Nashville, because this story has 2 tracks and they were always moving toward each other. I know what I know from 2 sources. The first is Priya, who maintained a cautious backchannel friendship with someone in my extended family and occasionally, carefully, passed along information she thought I needed. The second is a cousin named Lena, my father's niece, not my mother's side, who sent me a single long email in year 4 and has been quietly honest with me ever since. Here is what was happening. Derek had the company for approximately 18 months before he ran it into serious trouble. To be fair to the facts, he didn't steal from it. He didn't do anything deliberately destructive. He simply did what my father had always known he would do, which was to love the idea of the thing more than the work of it. He made decisions quickly and without counsel. He expanded into markets the company had no infrastructure to serve. He hired people he liked rather than people who were qualified. He lost 3 long-term clients in the first year by being unreachable during crises, because Derek had never in his life understood that a service business runs on the willingness to pick up the phone at bad times. By month 20, he had quietly taken a line of credit against the business to cover payroll. By year 3, he had remortgaged the house. My mother did not know about the remortgage until a letter arrived. Lena told me about the letter in her email. She said my mother had called her crying, which my mother did not do in front of people. She said my mother had asked Lena if she thought Caroline would, and then stopped herself and didn't finish the sentence. I thought about that unfinished sentence for a long time. I thought about what she was going to ask. Whether I would help, presumably. Whether, after everything, I would be the kind of person who helped. She couldn't finish it. Maybe she couldn't stand to hear the answer. Maybe she already knew what she'd done and couldn't hold the question and the knowledge of it in the same breath. I didn't reach out. I went back to work. Year 7. Merit Logistics Solutions was no longer small. We had moved into a larger office space. We had a dedicated IT team, a compliance department, a national carrier network that Deb had spent years building with the patience and precision of someone laying track for a railroad. We had just signed our first contract with a client whose name you would recognize if I said it, which I won't, but it was the kind of contract that meant something. The kind that changes a company's tier. I was sitting in a meeting with our new operations director when Marcus knocked and opened the door an inch. "I'm sorry to interrupt. There's someone in the lobby who doesn't have an appointment. He says he's family." Something in my chest went very still. "Name? Derek Merritt. He says he's your brother." The 4 people in that conference room were looking at me. I kept my face exactly where I needed it to be. "Tell him I'll be with him in 10 minutes, I said. "Offer him water." I finished the meeting. Not quickly, not dismissively, properly, the way you finish something you started. When the last person filed out, I sat alone in the conference room for exactly 3 minutes, and I thought about a back porch in Louisiana and wind chimes and my father's hand under mine and a gray suit and a manila folder and $25,000 and 500 miles of highway with the windows down. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked to the lobby. He looked older. Of course he did, we both did, but it wasn't just the years. He looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and was no longer certain he could keep carrying it. Thinner than I remembered. The ease that used to sit on him like a second skin was gone, replaced by something effortful and uncertain. He stood up when I walked in. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked past me, at the office behind the glass partition, at the logo on the wall, at the logo that said Merit Logistics Solutions in clean, confident letters, and I watched him do the math. I watched the number of employees visible through the glass. I watched him read the plaques by the reception desk. I watched him understand slowly and then all at once exactly where he was standing. He looked back at me. "Caroline. Derek. You built all of this." Not a question. A reckoning. "Yes," I said. "I did." He swallowed. Looked at the floor. Looked back up. And then he said the thing I had known, somewhere in the back of my mind, for 7 years would eventually be said. "I need help." The lobby was quiet. Marcus was looking very intently at his computer screen, which meant he was listening to every word. "Come back to my office," I said. And I turned and walked, and after a moment I heard his footsteps follow mine. He sat across from my desk the way he had sat across from me in that lawyer's office 10 years ago, looking at the surface of things, not quite meeting my eyes. But the stillness was different now. Then it had been the stillness of someone hiding something. Now it was the stillness of someone who had nothing left to hide behind. He told me about the business. The credit lines, the lost clients, the remortgage. He told me there were employees who hadn't been paid in 3 weeks. He told me the bank had sent a formal notice. He told me our mother was living with him now because she could no longer afford the expenses on the house separately. I listened to all of it without speaking. When he finished, he looked at me directly for the first time since he'd sat down. "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything," he said. "No," I agreed. "You don't." A pause. "I'm asking anyway." "I know." I let the silence sit for a moment. Not cruelly, just honestly. Because the silence had weight and it deserved to be felt. Then I said, "Before we talk about what you're asking for, I need to say something. And I need you to hear it without defending yourself. Because if you try to defend yourself, this conversation is over." He nodded. "I know about the second will, Derek." His face did something complicated and then went very still. "Gerald Foss told his wife before he died. She called me. 3 years ago." He looked at the window. His jaw moved. Nothing came out. "I'm not going to drag you into court," I said. "That ship has sailed and honestly, I made peace with it a long time ago. What I'm telling you is that I know. I need you to understand that I know, and that everything I say to you from this moment forward is coming from a person who knows exactly what you did, and is choosing deliberately how to respond to it." He turned back to me. His eyes were wet. Not performing, actually wet, the specific look of someone who has been found out and is too exhausted to be anything other than found. I'm sorry, Caroline, he said. 2 words. 3 syllables. The smallest possible container for something that had cost me 10 years. I know you are, I said. Sorry is a starting place. It's not a destination. I leaned back in my chair and looked at my brother, this man who had taken what was mine and run it into the ground, who had come to me across 500 miles because there was nowhere else left to go. And I thought about my father. I thought about what Robert Merritt would do. He fixed things. That was his whole philosophy. Not because the person who broke them deserved fixing. Because some things are worth more than the anger that has a right to let them stay broken. I want to be honest with you about something. When Derek sat across from my desk that afternoon, there was a part of me, a very real, very human part, that wanted to stand up, open the office door and say 2 words. Get out. I wanted to say, you came to the right place and you are getting the wrong answer. And I want you to leave the way I left that lawyer's office 10 years ago, with nothing but a check that doesn't begin to cover what was taken. And I want you to drive home with the windows down and figure out what comes next entirely on your own. I wanted that. I'm telling you because I think it matters. Because the version of this story where I float above the anger and respond from some place of pure, clean forgiveness is not the true version. The true version is that I sat in that chair and felt the full weight of 10 years. The shared house in Germantown, the notebook budget, Priya's pull-out couch, the funerals I attended alone, the holidays I worked through because working was easier than feeling the shape of what was missing. And I felt all of it rise up at once. And then I made a choice. Not because Derek deserved my help, but because I had spent 10 years becoming a person who made decisions from values, not from wounds. And I was not about to let him take that from me too. Here is what I will do, I said. Derek looked up. I will not give you money. I will not write a check that disappears into a hole and changes nothing structurally. That's not help, that's delay. He nodded slowly. What I will do is send my operations director and a financial consultant to Baton Rouge for 2 weeks. They will assess what's left of the business, what's salvageable, what isn't, what the actual liability picture looks like. They will give me an honest report. And then I'll decide what's possible, based on the report, not based on this conversation. He absorbed that. That's fair. It's not about fair, I said. Fair stopped being the operating principle of this family a long time ago. This is about whether there's something worth saving and whether saving it serves the people who depend on it. The employees who haven't been paid. Not you. Not Mom. Them. Something moved across his face. Not offense, recognition. The particular expression of someone hearing themselves described accurately for the first time. There's one more condition, I said. Okay. You tell Mom the truth. Not a version of it. Not a softened, managed, protected version. The full truth. The second will. Gerald Foss. What you did and why you did it. You tell her before my team arrives in Baton Rouge, because I will not walk into that situation with a lie still standing in the room. The color left his face. Caroline. That's the condition, Derek. It's not negotiable. A long silence. The kind that has weather in it. She's not well, he said finally. It's been a hard few years. Her heart. I know, I said. Lena keeps me informed. He blinked. He hadn't known about Lena. I'm not asking you to destroy her, I said more quietly now. I'm asking you to stop protecting yourself at the expense of her right to know what actually happened to her family. She has spent 10 years grieving a version of events that you constructed. She deserves the real one, even if it's hard. Especially because it's hard. Derek looked at his hands. They were his father's hands, same shape, same width. I had never noticed that before, or maybe I had and had not wanted to. What if she can't forgive me? He said. That's not a reason to keep lying to her, I said. That's a consequence you should have thought about 10 years ago. He didn't argue. He left my office an hour later with nothing promised and one condition to fulfill. I watched him walk through the lobby, past Marcus who nodded politely, through the glass door with the Merritt logo, and out into the Nashville afternoon. I sat back down at my desk. Deb knocked and came in without waiting, which she was allowed to do. You okay? She said. I think so. She sat down across from me, crossed her arms, and looked at me the way she'd looked at carrier contracts for 18 years, searching for the clause that would cost you later. Was that really your brother? Yes. He looked like someone who'd been hit by a slow-moving truck. He has, I said. He just didn't know the truck had a name until today. Deb nodded once, decisively. The way she always did when she'd heard enough to understand the situation. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to find me the best operations consultant we've worked with in the last 2 years. Someone honest. Someone who'll tell me the truth about what they find, even if the truth is that there's nothing left to find." "Done," she said. And she left. That was why I'd hired her. She never asked for more explanation than the job required. He told our mother on a Thursday. I know it was a Thursday because Lena called me on a Friday morning early, before I'd had my second cup of coffee, and said, "Whatever you said to Derek," he told her, "last night. I don't know everything, but I know she knows, and I know it was bad, and I think you should be ready for a call." The call came 4 hours later. My mother's voice on the phone was something I had not heard in 7 years. It was smaller than I remembered. Rougher. Like something that had been used hard and not maintained. "Caroline." Just my name. Nothing else for a long moment. "Mom. I didn't know," she said. "I need you to know that I didn't know." "I believe you." A sound on the other end that was not quite crying and not quite breathing. Something in between. "I sent your letter back," she said. "The one you mailed. I sent it back without opening it, and I have thought about that. I have thought about that so many times. I told myself you had made your choices and I had made mine, and I..." She stopped. Started again. "I was protecting him. I thought I was protecting the family. I didn't know what I was actually protecting." "I know," I said. "I'm so sorry, Caroline. I am so sorry. Your father, what Derek did to your father's, to his wishes." Her voice broke completely on that. Just fractured right down the middle. He would be so ashamed. Robert would be so ashamed of this. I closed my eyes. "Yes," I said. "He would." We stayed on the phone for a long time after that, not always talking. Sometimes just existing in the same silence, which was more than we'd done in 7 years. It was not a reconciliation. One phone call cannot carry that weight, and I would not insult either of us by pretending it could. But it was a beginning. A small, fragile, real beginning. Before we hung up, she said, "Are you happy, Caroline? In your life, are you actually happy?" I thought about my office. About Deb and Marcus and 41 people who showed up every morning to something we'd built together. About Priya in Chicago who still called every Sunday. About Lena who had quietly kept faith with me for years. About the name on the door that was mine in every way that mattered. "Yes," I said. "I actually am." She made a sound that I think was relief. "Good," she said softly. "That's good." My consultant's name was Phil Moran. 62 years old, retired operations executive, the kind of man who had seen every variety of business failure and maintained a complete absence of judgment about it because he understood that most failures were not about bad people but about bad decisions made by people who didn't know what they didn't know. Phil spent 11 days in Baton Rouge. He called me on day 12. "You want the honest version," he said. "Always. The business itself has good bones. Your father built something real, the infrastructure, the client relationships that survived, the reputation in the market. That's still there underneath the damage. The damage is significant, but it's not fatal. What would it take?" He gave me a number. Not a catastrophic number. A serious one. "And Derek," I said. A pause. "He's been in every meeting. He's asked good questions. He listens." Phil paused again. "He's not his father, Caroline. But he's not hopeless either. He just needed someone to actually hold him accountable for the first time in his life." I sat with that for a moment. "What would you recommend?" "Honestly, a restructure. Bring in management. Let Derek stay involved in a limited capacity. He knows the local relationships, the long-term clients who stayed. They trust his face even if they don't trust his judgment. But you put real operators around him. You treat it like a turnaround, not a rescue. And if I walk away entirely? Then it closes," Phil said simply. "In about 4 months. I thought about 43 employees at the peak. I thought about however many were left now. Phil had said 21, still showing up despite 3 weeks without pay because they had nowhere else to go and because some of them had been with my father since the beginning. I thought about a man named Earl who had driven one of Dad's trucks for 16 years, and whose retirement was tied up in a profit-sharing plan that would disappear if the company did. I thought about what my father built. I thought about what he would do. I flew to Baton Rouge on a Tuesday. I had not been back in 7 years. The airport was the same. The particular quality of the Louisiana air when you step outside, thick and warm even in November like the weather is making a point, was the same. I rented a car and I drove the route I had driven 100 times as a child, down I-10 and off at the exit I still knew by reflex, and into the part of the city where I had grown up. I did not drive past Magnolia Street. I wasn't ready for that. I went straight to the office of Merit Climate Solutions. It looked smaller than I remembered, which is what childhood places always do, but the sign was still up and the parking lot had 6 vehicles in it, and when I walked through the front door there was a woman at the reception desk who looked up and said, "Can I help you?" In the way people do when they're trying to sound more composed than they feel, which I suspected everyone in this building had been trying to do for months. "I'm Caroline Merritt," I said. "I'd like to speak to whoever's running operations today." The receptionist stared at me for exactly 2 seconds. Then she picked up the phone. I spent 2 days in that building. I walked every room. I looked at every file Phil had flagged. I sat in the break room and drank bad coffee with employees who were watching me with the specific careful attention of people who understand that the person across from them is deciding their future. I talked to Earl. He was 61 now, gray at the temples, the same steady eyes I remembered from when I was small, and he used to let me sit in the truck cab while he and my father talked in the driveway. He shook my hand with both of his and didn't say much. He didn't need to. On the second evening, I sat across from Derek in a conference room that smelled like my father's aftershave, which was in my head, I know, because it had been 10 years and rooms don't hold smells that long. But some memories are stored in the body, not the mind, and being in that building put things in me I hadn't expected to feel. "I've made a decision," I said. Derek had his hands flat on the table. He'd stopped trying to look composed 2 days ago, which I respected. Merit Logistics Solutions will provide bridge financing to cover the immediate payroll gap and the most critical vendor obligations. We will also provide management support, a restructuring team reporting to me for a period of 18 months. He was very still. The business will operate under a revised structure. You stay on in a client relations capacity. You do not make financial decisions above a threshold we'll specify in writing. Every significant decision goes through the operations manager my team installs. You'd be running it, he said. My team would be running it. You'd be part of it. Why? He said. And his voice when he said it was not defensive or relieved. It was genuinely bewildered. After everything, why? I thought about it for a real moment before I answered, because he deserved a real answer and not a line. Because 21 people showed up to work this morning in a building that has your name on it, and our father's reputation behind it. Because Earl has 16 years in a profit-sharing plan he can't afford to lose. Because Dad built something real and real things are worth more than the anger I have every right to feel about how I lost access to it. I paused. And because I am not willing to let what you did define what I do. That's mine to decide. Not yours. Derek looked at the table. His shoulders dropped in a way that was not defeat, it was something more complicated. The physical expression of someone setting down a weight they've been carrying so long they'd forgotten it was separate from their body. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right, he said. You'll spend the rest of your life trying, I said. Whether you make it right is a longer question, and honestly not one I'm focused on right now. Right now I'm focused on 21 employees and a restructuring timeline. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. You sound like Dad, he said. I did not respond to that. But I felt it land somewhere deep and stay there. I went to see my mother that evening. She was living in the house she'd shared with Derek, smaller than the house on Magnolia Street, which had been sold to cover debts 18 months earlier. She opened the door before I knocked, which meant she'd been watching for my car. She looked older. Of course she did. But it was more than that. She looked like someone who had been grieving something she couldn't name, which is the hardest kind of grief because it has nowhere to go. She stepped back to let me in without speaking. The living room was tidy in the way that people who have very little control over large things tend to make small things very controlled. Every surface was arranged carefully. There were photographs on a side table, and I let myself look at them as I passed. My father in his work clothes, grinning at the camera. Derek at graduation. A school photo of me at about 11 years old in a blue sweater. She had kept it. Through everything. The blocked numbers and the returned letters and the 7 years of silence. She had kept a photograph of me at 11 in a blue sweater on her side table. I don't know exactly what that meant. I know it meant something. We sat in the kitchen because kitchens are where real conversations happen in Southern families. She made tea without asking if I wanted it, and I held the mug with both hands the way I always had. And for a while neither of us said anything because the room was full of everything that had been unsaid for a decade and it needed a moment to settle before we could speak through it. "I looked for you," she said finally. "After a while. After enough time had passed that I started questioning things. I looked online. I didn't find much. I kept a low profile deliberately," I said. "For the first few years. I found a trade publication," she said. "About 2 years ago. A mention of a Caroline Merritt in Nashville logistics company. I didn't know if it was you." "It was me." She nodded. Her hands were around her own mug, and they looked like my hands, which I had never noticed before or never allowed myself to notice. "I should have called," she said. "Yes. I was ashamed," she said. By then I knew something was wrong. Not the whole truth, but enough to know something was wrong. And I was too ashamed to pick up the phone. "I know," I said. "I understand that." "Do you?" "I do," I said. "It doesn't make it hurt less. But I understand how shame works. I felt it too. Ashamed that I couldn't make my own family believe me. Ashamed of how long I let it matter as much as it did." She set down her mug. "You don't have to," she started. "Mom." I said it gently but clearly. "I'm not here to make this easier for you. I'm here because you're my mother and we have a lot of years to account for and I would rather do that than spend another decade not doing it. But I need you to sit in the discomfort of this with me. I can't do the heavy lifting for both of us." She looked at me for a long moment. And then she said something I had spent a very long time, in the back of my heart, wanting to hear. "You are so much stronger than I ever gave you credit for," she said. "And I am so sorry that you had to be." I did not cry. I had cried about this in private over many years in the specific hours of the night when you can't outrun what you feel. I had nothing left to cry right now. What I had instead was something quieter and more durable. I reached across the kitchen table and put my hand over hers. Same gesture. Different kitchen. Different decade. "We start from here," I said. "Not from then. Here." She turned her hand over and held mine. We sat like that for a long time. The restructuring took 14 months, not 18. Deb's team, because it was really Deb's team. She ran it with the precision of someone who has been waiting her whole career for a challenge exactly this size. Rebuilt the operational core of Merit Climate Solutions from the ground up. New carrier management processes, new client communication protocols, a financial reporting structure that meant Derek could not make a significant decision without 3 signatures, one of which was always mine. 21 employees became 26 by month 8. Earl's profit-sharing plan was secured and restructured. 2 of the longest-tenured clients who had left in the chaos came back when word got out that things had changed. Derek showed up every day. That was the thing I had not entirely expected. Not because I thought he was lazy, but because I had never seen him do something hard without a way out available. For the first time in his life there was no way out and he showed up anyway. He worked the client relationships, which was genuinely what he was good at. He sat in meetings where people told him things he didn't want to hear and he listened. He called me every other Friday with an update, which had been my requirement, and the calls got less painful as the months went on. He never asked me again why I had helped. I think he knew that asking again would diminish the answer. Month 16 of the restructuring, I flew back to Baton Rouge for a quarterly review. After the meeting, I drove down Magnolia Street. I don't know exactly why I was ready then and not before. These things don't announce themselves. You just find yourself making a turn you hadn't planned on making. The yellow house had new owners. The shutters were a different color, green now where they'd been white. There was a basketball hoop in the driveway that hadn't been there before. And a child's bicycle leaning against the garage. I parked across the street and sat for a moment. I thought about a kitchen table and an acceptance letter and my father's eyebrows going up. I thought about a back porch and wind chimes and you've always understood it, Caro. I thought about the way he used to appear in doorways and sit without saying anything until the right thing to say arrived. I thought about what he would make of all of it. The decade. The company. The way it had ended and the way it hadn't ended and the strange, imperfect thing being constructed now from the rubble. I thought he would say, "That's more or less how it goes. The thing is to keep going." I put the car in drive and left Magnolia Street behind. I'm sitting in my office in Nashville as I tell you this. It's evening. The building is mostly quiet, the particular stillness that settles in after the last meeting ends and before the cleaning crew arrives. My name is on the lease of this floor, on the door of this office, on the logo visible from the street if you look up at the right angle. It is mine in every way that things can be mine. On my desk there is a framed photo. It was taken 6 months ago. At a company anniversary dinner. 5 years of Merit Logistics Solutions in Nashville. Deb is in it and Marcus and our operations director. And about 30 other people who showed up on ordinary mornings and built something extraordinary alongside me. On the shelf behind my desk, next to that photo, there is another one. More recent. My mother standing in front of this building, squinting slightly into the sun, looking like someone who is trying to memorize something she can't believe she almost missed. She comes to Nashville twice a year now. We are careful with each other in the way that people are careful when they understand that what they're holding is fragile and worth the care. It is not the relationship I deserve to have always, but it is real. And real, I have learned, is worth more than perfect. Derek calls every other Friday. Some calls are shorter than others. Some months are harder than others. The business is stable, not thriving the way it once was, but stable and growing slowly, which is the only kind of growth that lasts. Earl is still there. He told me recently that my father would be proud, and I told him that I hoped so, and we both let that sit between us without needing to say anything else. The file on my hard drive called Record is still there. I haven't deleted it. I don't know if I ever will. It contains the truth of what happened, documented and dated, and maybe someday I'll decide I don't need it anymore, and maybe I'll decide I do. Either way, it's mine. The knowing is mine. Here is what I want to leave you with. When people hear a story like this, they want the revenge chapter. They want the moment where the person who did the wrong thing is made to pay in a way that is visible and proportional and satisfying. And I understand that desire. I felt it myself in the hotel room in Alexandria, Louisiana, staring at a ceiling with $412 in my checking account and wind chimes in my memory. But here is the truth about revenge. It requires you to keep the other person at the center of your story. It requires you to organize your life around what was done to you, which means the person who hurt you keeps dictating your direction even after they've walked out of the room. I chose something different. I chose to put myself at the center of my own story. I chose to build something so completely and undeniably mine that when the consequences of other people's choices finally arrived at my door, and they always arrive eventually because that is how choices work, I was in a position to decide. Not react. Decide. I decided to help. Not because Derek deserved it. Because the 21 people who showed up on ordinary mornings deserved it. Because Earl deserved it. Because my father's real legacy, not the legal one, the one that lived in the work and the reputation and the handshake reliability, deserved someone to protect it. And because I had become, over 10 years of hard and honest work, someone who made decisions from her values. And I was not going to let anyone take that from me. Not even the satisfaction of saying no. That's not a smaller choice than revenge. It's a larger one. My name is Caroline Merritt. I'm 34 years old. I left Louisiana with $25,000 and a name and the memory of a back porch conversation that no one else heard. I built the rest myself. And when they finally came looking for the daughter they had let go, she was right here. She had never needed them to see her to become someone worth seeing. She had just needed time. And work. And the absolute unshakable belief, inherited from a man who fixed things, that what is broken can be made right. Not always the way you hoped, but sometimes in ways better than you imagined. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the person whose name was left off something that should have had it, drop a comment. Tell me what you built after. And if you want more stories like this one, the next one is already waiting. I'll see you there.